What's up, everybody, and welcome to QnA, the show where I take your questions from YouTube and answer them here in video format. And as always, there's a ton of questions to get into, so let's just jump right into it. The first one is from Water Presents, who says, "Hey Q, would you be interested in signing D.D. Westbrook, giving Baker his favorite target from college, and he could stretch the field?" D.D. Westbrook would be interesting for the Browns to get, right? Because he's right in that sweet spot of who they'd be willing to take a flyer on in free agency. Now, a lot of this is going to depend on where you're at with Rashard Higgins, right? If you bring him back, you're probably not going to sign another wide receiver in free agency. But if you don't bring back Rashard Higgins, that opens you up to a lot of different possibilities. Somebody like John Ross, who's going to be up for like a minimum deal. D.D. Westbrook, who just tore his ACL, I think the season before, and he's recovering from that. So he's going to be having to take a kind of a gamble deal, and I think he would like to do it with Baker Mayfield, somebody he had his most production in college with. He's a deep threat. We don't know how fast he still is, but with modern medicine, we have a good idea that he'll still be as fast as he was. And all of these things add up to somebody who would be a decent signing for the Cleveland Browns there. Now, again, it depends on what you're going to do with the Rashard Higgins contract. It also depends on where he's at, D.D. Westbrook, his health situation going forward. But yes, it does make sense on some levels. It's just we have to see how some other dominoes fall in order to see if that's going to be something that makes a ton of sense, because it doesn't look like D.D. is going to re-signing with the Jacksonville Jaguars. They're going in a new direction, and it looks like, the Browns would be a good destination for him to be. My one question with him is, like, how many more receivers do you want to add to this room that are undersized? I do think you want to add more size, but you also want to add speed, which he does bring. So maybe this comes at the expense of like a JoJo Natson or somebody like that. Next question comes from Pierre Jonathan, who says, "Who in this draft can come and make an immediate effect on the Browns defense? And would I trust Delpit as a starter coming off of his Achilles injury?" As far as Delpit goes, yes and no. I believe in Delpit and his ability to become a starter during the 21 season. I just worry about his readiness week one. I think there's going to be some growing pains. This is somebody who, at best, is probably going to have about 3 weeks of training camp to get acclimated and physically run this off with defense. So that's a concern coming off of an Achilles injury. And he's a rookie, essentially. So that does worry me. So that is why I would be kind of hesitant with Grant Delpit. I think the plan should be to have somebody who's versatile, have a bunch of versatile safeties in that room, so you don't have to depend on putting Grant Delpit out there with 100-something snaps on day one. So that's what I hope the plan is with Grant Delpit, and I think the plan will be, as far as a draft, somebody the Browns can draft that will help them day one. Yeah, there is somebody. It's going to be a shock to you guys who follow me. I'm not a big fan of linebackers, and I've always said you don't go with linebackers in the first round unless you're convinced somebody is that, Luke Kuechly type of guy, that top tier freak of nature type of linebacker. And Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah out of Notre Dame, he's the guy, right? You talk about somebody who can help ease Grant Delpit into the rotation. This is a guy who's athletic enough that he could play some box safety, and you can slide around your safeties a little bit in order to kind of ease Grant back into the rotation once he starts to come back and play for the Browns. Also, Jeremiah is just a great athlete. You look at his tape, he holds up with slot receivers, he holds up with tight ends. This is a guy who did well and held up against Devonta Smith in Alabama, and also played well against Kyle Pitts. Like, this is a guy who has a lot of the tape on there that's just shows you this is a different type of linebacking prospect. And again, with linebacker prospects, you have to be careful, right? Because for every, Patrick Willis or freak of nature linebacker you think you see, you'll run into 5 or 6 guys who just aren't that, right? But this guy, if you look at his tape, and if you want to have a good 15 to 30 minutes, if you have those on your hand, search Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. He's called Joker. Put that in your YouTube search bar and just watch all the tape. because he is amazing. He has great instincts. He has great athleticism, good strength, size. He has it all at the linebacking position. And, this is the kind of draft where a linebacker could slip all the way to like 10, 15. And if he does slip past the top 10, that's where Andrew Berry needs to pick up the phone and get interested in trying to trade up for him, because if he's available at that point, that's a very good thing for the Cleveland Browns, and that puts him right in your price range because, again, the Browns don't need to use all these draft picks. You can bundle a ton of them together to get that guy, and that guy will help you day one on defense with a lot of the issues that the Browns have had. But, yeah, if there's one guy that I think can make a difference on the defensive side of the ball this year that I've seen, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, he's the guy as of now. The next question comes from Dominic Snipe FN, who says, what are your thoughts on a sign and trade for Larry Ogunjobi? If it happens, it happens. The Browns could use another asset, I guess. They have a ton of late round picks, so I don't know how realistic it is. But, Larry Ogunjobi probably not going to be re-signed by the team. This looks pretty likely. It doesn't seem like that's the direction the team's headed in. So if they can find a sign and trade, why not? But I don't think it's something they're going to break their backs trying to do. The next question comes from Garrett, who says, what do you think will happen if the Browns aren't aggressive this offseason? It's going to be interesting to see, right? Or it's going to be difficult to see what the difference is, because I think this Browns team, if they just get everybody healthy, is going to be better than last year's Browns team. I think the defense is going to go from being a deficit, a liability for the team, to something that is kind of a zero-sum game for the team, right, where it's just kind of there. It's a top 15 defense. It's not a positive. It's not a negative. I think the difference, if they're aggressive this offseason, is that you can have a defense that can be an asset. Like, you're talking about a top 10 defense to go along with your crazy good offense that the Cleveland Browns have. Now, if you have both sides of the ball being an asset, that's a team that can win a Super Bowl. If you have one side of the ball that's really good, another one that's just okay, you can win a Super Bowl like that. It's just going to be a little bit tougher. And when you talk about the quarterbacks in the AFC, the offenses that you got to go through in the AFC, Lamar Jackson, how good he is when he gets going and running the ball. Patrick Mahomes, how good he is all the time. They have a ton of guys in this conference, a ton of quarterbacks in this conference. So you want to have a better defense to have a better chance to make the Super Bowl and come out of there. And, every time we get to the Super Bowl, we get wrapped up in all these offenses, and we forget how important defenses is once we get to the Super Bowl. So, you don't want to be lacking in that department. And I think, this is the chance to kind of go from not just lacking or not just being all right and holding your own defensively to having a top tier defense. I think that's the difference. Next question comes from Chris Gustafaro, who says, hey, Q, with JJ Watt at the picture, should the Browns draft a defensive end or go for somebody in free agency? They have to go for somebody in free agency. There is no Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah on the defensive end side in this draft for the Browns that's going to be there possibly at 26. There just isn't, right? This is not a year where Chase Young's coming out. There's no guy like that coming out of college you're convinced can be a 8 to 12 sack guy immediately in the NFL. And what the Browns need is that kind of production right now next to Miles. The next question comes from Evo B, who says, with the return of Delpit, do you feel the Browns can still draft Travion Morig out of TCU, giving the Woods the chance to run 3 safeties on his defense? Well, he does a lot of what would be like kind of like a cover 3 and a cover 1, where there's like a one safety that takes a ton of ground there. So yeah, the long story short, Joe Woods is going to want as many DBs as possible, and a lot of the issues that the Browns faced last season when it came to the defense and the coverage issues were that they just simply ran out of defensive backs. This was a team that was pretty deep at defensive back coming into the season, but they lost 2 of their big pieces, Greedy Williams and Grant Delpit, early in training camp, and then it kind of just kept piling on top of each other to where we're regularly starting like MJ Stewart and Robert Jackson. So So that was an issue for the Cleveland Browns. The lack of depth or the amount of DBs that just got churned through was an issue. So I would expect them to go kind of overload that defensive back room with young guys that they like, young athletic guys. So yeah, they're going to probably add more DBs, more safeties, all kind of things in that room. Next question comes from Mike Wack 67, who says, "Sub Q, the other day I heard Chris Sims talking about the possibility of bringing in Levante David at middle linebacker would be a fantastic move. What are your thoughts about possibly pursuing Levante David?" I like Levante David as a player. I don't think the Browns should sign him because for the money it would take to bring in Levante David, I just think that money could be better spent on a defensive end or a defensive tackle, right? You're only going to get one shot at the big name in this free agency period for the Browns unless they're willing to go over the cap, which I don't think this is the year they're going to be going over the cap. So you're only going to get that one swing at it, right? And I just don't think that money's best spent with Levante David when you can get a guy like Demario Davis or Quan Alexander or even, retain Malcolm Smith and BJ Goodson, who are good enough in that linebacking role. I get what Chris is saying, that the Browns defense, Joe Woods comes from Tampa Bay, and Tampa Bay used to run Tampa too, but I don't think this defense really is that reliant on great linebacking play. And if you do have a linebacker that you need them to be kind of more in the mold of Owusu Koromaya, you know what I mean? The young kind of hybrid linebacker rather than a traditional middle linebacker like Levante David is. And look, Levante David would help you greatly against the run. He will help you against some tight ends, but I don't think he's going to be the answer to this defense in the way that paying $15 million or even more would require that guy being the answer. The next question comes from Jerry Towton, who says, "Hey Q, when I trade a 2 and David Njoku for Stephon Gilmore?" No, I think that's a little high. I think Stephon Gilmore is probably going to go for a mid-round pick. 3rd round at the most, probably 5th round at the least. And I don't think you need to package a good young player with that. And I don't think they would take David Njoku. I know we're high on David Njoku right now, but again, the cumulative numbers just aren't there for a guy getting paid $5 million next season, this season coming up. So keep that in mind. And I don't think a lot of teams outside of Cleveland who gave him that 5th-year extension are going to be willing to take that on. So I don't think David Njoku's a great trade piece. I think he's a good piece for the Browns right now, but I just don't think he has much trade value because, again, that 5th-year option for tight end, that, again, the production, the cumulative numbers just aren't there to justify it, is not going to make a lot of sense for a lot of teams. The next question comes from Giants Nation, who says, "What's up, Q? Long time no see. Miss me with the questions. Russell Wilson, if he gets traded, where do you think he goes?" I'm asking because the AFC team would take him. I think it would be the Steelers. It's definitely not going to be the Steelers just because the Steelers just aren't in the market for a quarterback. They just re-signed Big Ben. They don't have the cap. They don't have the assets, the resources, or the money necessary to do that. But as far as Russell Wilson goes, where he can go, the one place is Houston. Maybe they just swap him for Deshaun Watson. And since Deshaun Watson's younger, Houston gets a pick or something like that to take Russell. I don't know. At this point, there's so many assets that need to be moved around to get either of those two guys. I don't think they can both be traded for in the same offseason. I don't think Russell, his problems are as deep as the problems that Watson has with his organization. So I think Watson's going to be the one that goes. And I think Russ is probably 100% going to stay in Seattle. But that's it for this week's questions. Again, guys, thank you for asking them. Have a great day. Have a good night.